We're bringing you boots on the ground insight from the ranchers, conservationists, and partners who are helping to preserve the best of the Golden State for generations to come. Join the California Rangeland Trust for inspiring stories of resilience, innovation, and hope as we get tuned into the land.
Welcome back to Tuned Into the Land. I am your host, Michael Delbar, CEO of the California Rangeland Trust. Each episode, we explore the people and the stories that shape our working lands, from ranchers and conservationists to policymakers and industry leaders. California's agricultural landscape is constantly evolving, facing challenges like water scarcity, climate change, labor shortages, all the while remaining a powerhouse of food production. With California Ag Day tomorrow, March 19th, we are thrilled to welcome a leader who plays a pivotal role in shaping the Golden State's agriculture industry, California Secretary of Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross. A lifelong advocate for farmers, ranchers, and sustainable agricultural landscapes, Secretary Ross has dedicated her career to supporting those who feed our nation. Her journey in agriculture spans from her rural Nebraska roots to serving as president of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers, and later as Chief of Staff to USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack. Now, as Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture, she leads the nation's largest agricultural economy, navigating the challenges of production, sustainability, and policy. So with that, here's my interview with Secretary Ross. Today, I'm lucky enough to be sitting down with Secretary Karen Ross to discuss her path in the industry, her current priorities for California agriculture, and the critical role of working lands conservation in ensuring a thriving future for both producers and the environment. Secretary Ross, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here. You have an amazing background and career. Why don't you give us a little bit of history behind how you got from in Sacramento, from Nebraska, and all the way to the secretary's position?
Yeah. So this is what happens if you live long enough. You know, the journey takes us down a long pathway. I feel very fortunate, and I'm so grateful for where I come from and how I was raised. I like to tell everybody lovingly that I came from the middle of nowhere. It's western Nebraska. It's like 20 miles from the Wyoming border. So I used to say, I'm in the middle of nowhere. You can see Wyoming from the ranch. And so it's dryland farming there. But my dad, what he really loved about farming was the cattle side of that. So we always had cow-calf operation, never really large, maybe 100, 125, 150. But he adored feeding cattle out in the wintertime. It was his way of adding value to our feed grains. And so we all had our chores in the morning before the bus came to pick us up. A very small county, many more cows than people. And today, Banner County has less than 1,000 people in it. Yeah, but they still have the consolidated kindergarten through 12th grade school. Second largest graduating class, 32. My senior class the year I graduated. And it was just a wonderful way to grow up as a 4-H kid. And I did cattle and sewing and cooking and all those kinds of things. And then over a period of time, I ended up doing my first 2 years of college at a state college in northwestern Nebraska, and then ended up working for a United States senator through a boss of mine that I'd had that was also a big cattle feeder and a Sandhills farming family, and met the person who became a United States senator. So I worked for him full time and went to night school to get my degree from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. But my job was so cool because that's where I really I wasn't really anxious to go back onto the farm. But when I left the farm, I just felt like something's lost for me. And when I learned about farm bills and the senator sat on the U.S. Senate Ag Committee, we did our share of farm bill hearings across the state. And then I just covered anything outside of Omaha. I was the liaison to all 93 counties.
Oh, wow.
And so got to know people across the state and see our agriculture, went into the agricultural leadership program, which was patterned after the California Ag Leadership Program. Met my husband, got married, and then he came home one day and said, I got the job of my dreams in California. I'm like, do they have agriculture out there, really? And Yeah, we do. That's my answer to everybody. And yeah, we do. And lots of it, and so different and so bountiful and so diverse.
400 crops?
Well, we say 400 crops. Some people say there's more. But what I love about it is it's an important part of our landscape. It's an important part of our culture because of all the blending of families who came from everywhere to be here. But its foundation is this beautiful rangeland. And that's what I love about what you do at CRT is knowing that. So when I finally got a job with the Agricultural Council of California representing farmer-owned cooperatives, we shared an office building with California cattlemen. So I learned a lot about the cattle industry here. But it was farmers on that board who taught me so much. They were so welcoming and just gave me my tutorial in California agriculture, which I've always valued that. And then became, after 7.5 years, president of California Wine Grape Growers, which of course it makes a lot of sense for a woman from Nebraska to become president of California Wine Grape. Yeah, you enjoy wine. I enjoy wine. A wonderful experience working with that board. And it was at a time of growth in the wine sector, which unfortunately is not so much right now.
Right.
And continued just through the travels. Wine is now everywhere in the state. My first trip to Paso Robles was not the same Paso Robles that it is today. I'll just leave it at that.
It's really grown.
Yep. And then Tom Vilsack invited me to come back and serve as his chief of staff, which my husband was very supportive of me doing and thought that would be a multi-year commitment, but it was about 15 months. And when Governor Brown was sworn in, I interviewed with him the day after, and he invited me to be his secretary. And I've been very lucky to stay here to work for the people in agriculture, to work with the people at CDFA. I'm grateful every day for the opportunities I've been given to work with such a great, amazing sector of our economy.
Well, I think that's reciprocal because when you had the appointment from Governor Brown, and then when Governor Newsom came in, when you were retained as secretary, the industry was ecstatic. And I think that says a lot about the way in which you run the department and that you interact and work with the producers across the state. I think that says a lot. And we're very, very happy and glad and fortunate that you're in this role.
I appreciate that. The most important thing we could do here is customer service.
What were some of the lessons you learned during that amazing career?
So one, just coming from a really small community. My mom died like when I was a freshman. I have 3 younger brothers, and it was like the whole community of moms that, kind of helped get us through some really tough times. So I've always been about collaboration and cooperation. And I think, that's a value for rural communities. You come from a rural community, like neighbors helping neighbors. When something bad happens, everybody shows up to help with harvest. Everybody shows up to help with branding because the food's really good. I know that for a fact. And so I just think that I'm always looking for connections and ways to find what we have in common as a way to try to approach some of the issues. Being able to try to convey what we do in our fields and our orchards and our pastures has a direct, tangible benefit to consumers. And for years, we only thought of that as the crop that reached their plate. And it's so important that, and thanks to the leadership and commitment of California farmers and ranchers we're always thinking a generation ahead of how do we leave this better than I found it, which of course now is sustainability, it's resilience, it's adaptation. And how do we convey that part of what we do, the value that brings to all Californians beyond the crops that we harvest. And that to me is a challenge, but it's one I thrive on because it's so important for keeping California the iconic place that it is, just to look at it, let alone to taste it and experience it. And those are lessons along the way, trying to figure that out. And how do we create new partners and strategic partnerships that will surprise people? I still remember when the coalition of cattlemen and the livestock sector and some of the conservation groups were walking the halls together to talk about this is the impact when these generations make the transition and real estate taxes and what it means on estate tax. And that was a unified voice. People were going to listen to you because that was an unusual group to have before you, right?
That's the coalition,
smart. Yes.
Rangeland Coalition.
Smart and so strategic. And you've only built on that over the years. Very impressive.
That is, when you walk the halls, whether it's the building here in Sacramento, well, the Capitol we call the building, or the halls of Congress, when you have that diverse constituency from the environmental groups, the wildlife groups, the ranching groups, entering a member's office and the members looking at hearing the message and goes, what's the downside?
Yeah, exactly.
You are all on the same page. And that unification is so critical to the future of what we do.
Takes a lot of leadership. And the thing is, I always tell people, you're not going to find anybody you agree with 100% all the time. But what matters is where you can come together and you can show the multi-benefit that comes from something that happens on that land or working with this particular group as a partner.
Yeah.
And so you just have to, it's like families, right?
It's the 80-20. Put the 20 you're not going to agree on, put it aside, and focus on the 80% we can agree on.
Yes.
You mentioned the current condition of the wine grape industry, which is not really strong right now. Cattle seems to be a little strong right now. We don't want to say that too loud because it doesn't seem to last very long. But what are some of the challenges that you are seeing in California agriculture today?
There are plenty. And I think one, regardless of the crop that you're talking with, is just the continued fast increases in the cost of production. And part of that is all the inputs. Some of it goes back to the supply chain disruptions, but we all know from experience when prices go up, they might ease a little bit, but they never drop to the before and then the after. I think that's always a challenge. And so we're seeing that across all input costs. But our energy costs are a factor in agriculture. It takes a lot of energy, whether it's the transportation part of it or the production part or the processing part. And labor costs, of course, affect different operations. And that's really been a move towards more automation and crops that can be more easily automated. So those are all big factors. Trade has been challenging for the last 5 to 7 years. There's always more that can be done in that space. And we're going through an uncertain time right now. And it's going to be important that we all work together, that we're all communicating to the leadership in Washington, D.C., because that's a federal issue. We all have to be very forthright in sharing what the impacts are, because this administration does care about farmers and ranchers. And I know that Secretary Rollins has said repeatedly she wants to hear directly from farmers and ranchers. And there may not be, we may not be able to get everything we want, but it's really important that we're all communicating and we're providing the data that's needed to help them make better informed decisions. So trade will continue to be an issue for us. I think there's also opportunities for everything that we look at here, opportunities in health and nutrition, and how do we keep a healthier population and avoid chronic diseases. We all have a role to play in that. That's the good thing about having people learn early in life, healthy lifestyle habits and not going, out of this realm. Like it balances everything, right? I'm very mindful of some of the issues for our friends in livestock proteins right now as well. And then of course, water. It will always be, this is California, enough said,
that's
right?
A given.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing some interesting challenges on land use, which partly is wildfire, definitely. And then with less water and the implementation on the valley floor, in particular with sustainable groundwater management, what are the land use patterns going to be and how disruptive could that be for just production systems where we have critical mass of like moving it into the first stage of processing? I hope that we're all being very mindful and strategic about those kinds of discussions as well.
Yeah, the water one, whether it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act or SGMA, as it's more commonly called, those challenges in the surface water. And when we have Sites Reservoir is a project that's been on the books for 4 decades.
Yeah.
And it seems to be getting closer to getting there and getting constructed. But then there's a movement to remove dams and remove water supplies. And there's one on the North Coast that will impact 600,000 people if that goes away. we really got to be cognizant of what is the impact to agriculture and to people's lives when we lose a water source like that. Is that the right answer? When those water sources, whether they're ponds on agricultural properties that are used for fire control or putting out fires.
Yeah.
Cal Fire loves those. That's great places to go dip the water baskets and put on the fires.
Yeah.
But when we have constraints in creating new ponds, I know this is not your purview.
But if it was
your purview, I'm sure we would have some good progress. I know that. But it's not, unfortunately. But those are things that, holistically we have to look at in across the state government. One of the things that we look at, a new rule here, a new regulation there. Maybe a landowner or a farmer or rancher can deal with that, but pretty soon it's a death by 1,000 cuts.
It is.
The $5 diesel makes it really tough, and the labor issues and
paperwork
issues. So, as the Secretary of Food and Agriculture, like I mentioned, you do an amazing job with the department and in the industry. How do you challenge or how do you balance what goes on in the Capitol when they have potential for some negative impacts on the industry that you're trying to work to keep alive?
Yeah. And we spend a lot of time on that because, quite truthfully, many of the ag groups spend a lot more time over at the Cal EPA building with all of those different agencies, whether it's air, water, pesticides, increasingly Cal Recycle because of plastics and packaging, and diverting organic waste streams, but also at natural resources. I know how many hours y'all spend over there. And so understanding that, and I need to be, and my staff on the executive office we need to be able to explain that. And we really work hard to engage because we have scientific and agronomic expertise here to engage as early in a rulemaking process as possible. We're not able to do as much on just the straight legislative work. We're a technical resource. And of course, when I'm in on some very, very specific things around the code that I have oversight for, I will get asked questions, and I try to be as factual as possible, but also connect them to people who can fill in those pictures for them more. And we would love to find more ways to streamline a lot of the work for compliance. And it is a very active conversation. We're doing a small pilot project around irrigated lands and our Food Safety Modernization Act because of all the water nexus there to see what could we do. But here's what I caution people. The laws get passed, and I think the ag groups do a very good job for the vast part of being able to educate lawmakers on what those impacts would be. But then they get passed and not always well defined. And it's up to a regulatory agency to spend a couple of years on workshops and hearings to write regulations. And then we just add regulations. And so I always encourage lawmakers to think about maybe for every law that passes, we could suggest 5 that come off the books because it's cumulative. Because that's it's the stack on top of the stack on top of the stack. And then it's multiple agencies. And when many of these were put on the books, it was 60 years ago. There's a lot that's there now. And that's the conundrum of, we've gone through an administration a few ago now where blowing up the boxes didn't get us a lot of progress on that either. If I had the answer, I'd stop blabbering like this and say, here's the answer.
No, I don't envy you. It's a tough position to be in because they said you've got the support and the faith of the community and the industry that you're in charge of, in a sense, and dealing with colleagues that don't have that understanding, and yet they're adding another layer of those, another cut. Yeah. And pretty soon, the hemorrhaging is out of control.
Yeah. And I do think one of the things I try really hard to do, and it comes pretty natural to me because I'm an optimistic person, just the pride that every Californian should have on what comes from our ag land and knowing how bountiful and nutritious and diverse it is from any other state, let alone any other nation. And how do we help people to understand that cannot just be taken for granted?
Right.
And these are the people that work hard to make it possible for all of us.
And that's one of the areas that we encourage our landowner partners is to tell your story.
Yeah.
Tell what you're doing. And it's tough, as you know, a lot of farmers and ranchers are very private folks.
Exactly.
They like to look over the fence and see what's going on in the neighbor's place, but they're pretty private.
Right.
But we're seeing more, maybe it's the newer generation, maybe it's the social media and the ease of doing that. But if we don't tell that story as an industry, it's going to be told for us, and it's never told right. Yeah. And that's the case.
It is. I will say I have watched cattlemen through both CRT as well as CCA just do a great job of engaging. Now, let's face it, walking in with a nice looking cowboy hat and some good looking boots, like people like, what, who wouldn't want to sit down and have a conversation with you? But I've seen that they're so engaging, and they're just talking from their heart of where I come from, and this is my family, and talking about the generations that we're hoping to keep on this land. And it's hard not to want to sit down and listen to that story. So I give great kudos to you all. I really do.
Well, thank you. One of the areas that I know that your department plays a role, and if you can help us understand maybe some of the ideas and actions that are happening, is in regard to meat processing, whether that's harvest, whether that's the cut and wrap, the processing side. We are losing those facilities in the state, and particularly on the some of the smaller ranches, the ranchers that are trying to do the direct to consumer or small retail sales of their product. That could be enough margin there to kind of help keep them going. Yet when we have to transport the live animal 3 hours to a facility and then and then at $5 diesel, and then bring take them to another place for processing, and then that margin isn't high enough to justify that extra cost. What role can the state play through CDFA particularly to help create more opportunities for that, either through USDA inspection, or maybe there's some alternatives to that? What can you offer that way?
So one of the biggest roadblocks is, if you're only doing in-state and have a state meat inspection program, which ours was lost more than 20 plus years ago for meat inspection, but that could always come back if we could really make all the numbers work. A number of my colleagues from other states got grant funds through their states during COVID, when this really became even more evident. And I'm watching very carefully, because at my meetings every quarter, I hear how it's working or how it isn't. There are a lot of really creative people working together. Some of it is a part ownership of cattlemen themselves with a meat packer that's more traditional, and a lot of small scale ones. But at my last couple of meetings, the numbers aren't working. It's just making numbers work. And the hard part is, if you can do direct sales and you're really good at it, you do want to ship across lines. And the state inspection, what that fee per hour has always been another barrier as well. So it's like, do we have enough animals to put through and make that work? We all grew up in small towns and everybody had the meat locker, right? Got to know those guys and it was mostly all guys. So I'm going to say that. Got to know them really well. Everybody had their locker. Everybody took their beef or their pork or whatever it was. And small towns, that's just, I don't know if it's a combination of rules and regs. I do think it's helping that more chefs are really into, the whole carcass thing, and they're doing their part to try to give some business and some credence to that. And the interest in meat cutting, when you just think about the grocery stores themselves that are looking for people like that. But I just can't see so far economically how to make it work. But it's just a market that's big enough in a particular area. I know there's some people on the North Coast in particular that are really working hard on this. Yeah. And UC Davis is doing a big project on this with some groups. I don't know. You tell me.
No, I wish I had the answer as well. I know that there's producers that are traveling that 3+ hours, or even looking to go into Oregon or somewhere else to have those processed. And you don't need that margin. Like I said, is not there. You can't transport besides the impact of driving that far back and forth. So if there was a way to have a facility that, even if you were just doing in-state, that CDFA could sign off on, you can get the stamp and you're legal. I think that could be a big boom for some producers who are just trying to, maybe it's only a dozen animals or 50 animals a year that they do, but that could be enough to pay for some of that, those higher inputs.
I know we've had a couple bills in recent years that was mostly for on-farm, wasn't it? Like 1 or 2 animals for on-farm. Do you remember the bill from about 4 years ago? I'm thinking I should have looked that up before we started this conversation. Yeah. There's a follow-up for us. We'll do our homework.
What are some of the emerging trends you're seeing in California agriculture? We're always on the cusp of new trends.
New trends. I'm not going to talk about wolves. That was the other challenge I didn't bring up because I know, especially in the northeast part of the state.
That was a big discussion at the Cattleman's breakfast.
Oh, when you had your breakfast?
Yes.
Yeah, I was out of town. Yeah, good.
It took up some time. But it was a good conversation.
Yeah, because Secretary Crowfoot was there this year, right?
He did a great job of addressing it and recognizing the challenges. Solutions are still out there somewhere, but at least the challenges are recognized.
Yeah. So what else is going on? Trends. Obviously, the interest has only grown more in, we call it climate smart agriculture, which is a global term. It first came out of the UN. And then Secretary Vilsack did a lot of work to establish the alliances on a global basis and bring research dollars to that space. Just the impact of extreme weather events happening more frequently. Just taking some recent examples of flooding that was characterized as 100-year floods. And then 3 years later, they were happening in some of the same spots. Those horrendous winds, the derecho, remember those winds? That was in Iowa and Missouri, flattened crops, torrential rains, temperature fluctuations. So the losses of extreme weather events has really caused a lot of people to take a look at, well, how do we build some resilience on the land? And that's been a change. And I think the understanding that we're creating these environmental benefits and public health benefits that haven't been factored in to monetize. And I think some of the work that's been happening on measure, monitor, and verify could create an alternative revenue stream. I think the circular economy, animal waste, all biomass waste to energy or other products is another potential revenue stream. Like we need to create additional revenues, and just how the local procurement programs for schools and seeing more hospitals and healthcare centers. Those are having really tangible benefits that people are really starting to see, that if we can continue to make sure we've got the infrastructure to support that, I see that as a huge plus, especially if we're going to go through more turbulent global market times right now. We need to make sure that we are able to have market. You can't just do it on grants and one-time payments. There has to be markets and economics coming to this. Those are where I see the opportunities of just our practices themselves are creating cleaner air. I mean, look at what you guys have been able to, you guys, meaning men and women in the cattle sector, have been able to do to really have people understand, appreciate, and value wildfire prevention with the smart grazing practices that you have. Think about 10 years ago, it was a very different conversation than it is now. That's going to be huge for access to land, access to continued grazing, and you're providing those benefits. We also saw that for people to understand what's happening on the upper watershed has a direct impact on me, whether it's for water availability and quality. Think about these things. So how do we ensure that the total package of what we do in our practices is generating support for the continuation and maybe some additional revenue streams, which are certainly justified.
You may recall the ecosystem services study that we commissioned a few years ago.
I love that study.
UC Berkeley did, and that showed, when you talk about the value, the monetization, the value to Californians on just 300,000 acres of our portfolio, which is now north of 400,000 acres.
Yeah.
That financial benefit to folks from a monetized standpoint was $1.44 billion a year. That tells you that open space, that clean air, that clean
Absolutely.
water, food and fiber production. That's huge. What's not in that study, if you may recall, is that fire fuel reduction.
Yeah.
That's not in that study because
That's right.
that data did not exist.
That's right.
But and Secretary Crowfoot at the CCA breakfast this week brought up the value of grazing on state lands and how we need to, as a state, do a better job of getting livestock out there to graze that and reduce that fire fuel. It's a different conversation, like you said, Secretary, today than it was 10 years ago. We had one point in time, the director of state parks addressing a group saying we got to keep cattle off of these lands. And there's a collective in the audience going, wait a minute. And so we all swarmed to him and had a little conversation afterwards. But that value of reducing that fire fuel load is so important. Yep. And grazing is a natural way to do that. Absolutely.
And people, grazing, just like olive farming, ranchers are constantly adapting to the conditions. It is smart rotational grazing that makes a lot of sense for those ecosystem services. And I think that's what it's hard for people not from the sector to understand and appreciate, this constant adaptation. Some people call it tinkering, but it is. It's like every day, every year, every season. You got to be in tune with what's happening on the land and with nature.
Well, you mentioned earlier on sustainability.
Yep.
And regenerative ag. And what does, in your opinion, what does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, well, first and foremost is that ability to continue to farm without borrowing from the future. And so that means we all work to minimize our footprint and the impact to people and planet. I mean, at the end of the day. And that's really regenerative, is that as well. Regenerative, my brother's the one that really embraces that because he feels that it's being characterized as it's not just taking good care of what we have, it's helping to restore it and renew it because of the soil practices, which of course grazing also is a contributor to that. And when we think about the value for biodiversity, and we are a biodiversity hotspot, but we're all losing biodiversity. What happens in our soil, that's 1/3 of the world's biodiversity is in the soil underneath our feet. So soil health practices are a big part of that. And it's just really being mindful, trying to minimize the inputs that we use where we can. And you can't do that without a healthy system, which is part of the ecosystem itself. So when I think about sustainability, it's about the ability to farm and produce going into future generations without taking away from their ability to do that. And if we are not afraid of science and technology, those are tools to help us do it ever better. And that's what we see with each generation that comes back to the ranch or to the farm. They got all those new ideas, and there's a lot of good ones there.
If they make economic sense.
But you have to. But you can't stay on the... Farmers can't keep farming if there's not profit. Right. Profit is not a dirty word, okay? Profit is about having the resources to reinvest and making sure that there's something to be handed down to the next generation, however that might look. And you cannot you're not sustainable if you're sacrificing the environment for economics or economics for the environment. They can be coexistence and work in harmony.
No, that's exactly right. There can be a push to do a bunch of best practices, but if they don't make economic sense, the landowner can't afford to do it because those best practices don't work on asphalt and concrete. And if we run them out of business, that's what we're left with.
Perfect. That's perfectly said. Exactly right.
Some of the conservation initiatives that California has been a leader in, one of them is 30 by 30. Conserve 30% of our state lands and waters by 2030. One of the challenges that we had when that rolled out, I know this isn't in your department
but
again.
I was part of this discussion. I remember.
Is that agricultural conservation easements didn't count. Even though the land is conserved permanently, they weren't counted towards that goal. Now, we've worked with the Resources Agency and we've been able to get most of our Rangeland Trust easements included in that. There's some debate whether intensified agriculture land it's permanently protected, is protected for the count. But one of the areas that we thought was interesting was, and this is kind of going back to the fire issue, was the public lands that should be considered protected unless they have grazing or timber management. And that's a concept that we've been beating our heads against the wall saying, with the wildfires we've had in the state of recent years, we should have learned that if lack of management is a disaster in more ways than one. Any thoughts on how we can, what can we do as industry to impress upon our policy makers that the work that we're doing in the agriculture realm in protecting these lands is valuable towards meeting that goal?
Well, and part of it is by being able to show the contribution to biodiversity, which is what's driving 30 by 30, right? And so it's having people understand today's practices are not the practices of 50 years ago, because some people just think ag has always been this static thing that's never changed,
right,
which is nothing further from the truth. You and I both know that. And then I also think when you look at the state's goals just for achieving carbon neutrality and coping with climate change, look at the targets that have been set for working lands. I mean, the fact that we got working lands in means something. Working lands are not idle lands.
Right.
They're not ignored lands. And unfortunately, we've all seen that sometimes public ownership doesn't have the resources or even the knowledge to manage, to work those lands for the benefits that they were intended to do. And I think many of our conservation partners and some of the environmental groups came to that realization more than a decade ago. We can achieve environmental goals faster and go further when we create these partnerships. And I hope that nothing in the rhetoric that we're seeing a little bit right now destroys that, because that's a win-win for the community, for our families, and for those people who are so deeply committed to the environment. And I just see the work that your organization, leaders like you, the people who had the vision for this, is doing, that is helping to create that broader understanding. Look at the issues around water, healthy rivers, healthy landscapes. That's all about our part of being in this ecosystem and how we manage water and land together for the multi-benefit that we're all looking for. We just can't give up on that.
We've talked a little bit about the challenges that agriculture faces in California, but it's not all doom and gloom. What excites you in the future of agriculture in California?
Yeah. So I would say, I think the response and the way that the ag community has embraced our incentive programs for, whether it was for conservation planning on the farm, pollinator habitat, incentives, healthy soils. Obviously, I get excited about that because, again, did I mention already, 30% of the world's biodiversity is in the soil underneath our feet. And that is what we will use to continue feeding future generations. The on-farm water use efficiency. I mean, just looking at the tools that we were able to capitalize on one-time funds. Obviously, some of those are going to be impacted by how we do or do not extend cap and trade and the auction proceeds that have been reinvested in agriculture because we believe in its future. I'm excited about the work of Jobs First. If you look at the blueprint that was rolled out 2 weeks ago by the governor, that's built on 13 regional plans that were about communities coming together, all walks of life within those communities. What is your vision for this community? 8 of those have some ag connection directly. A lot of them are around ag tech, but it's also really embracing local food production and being part of local institutional procurement, as well as just the broadband needs. If we want to have all these new practices on the land, we got to have connectivity on the land. So there's a lot there to be excited about. And for me, part of that is, especially ag tech, maybe a way of getting new energy, new people from urban areas that fall in love with agriculture from a different pathway. We need that kind of energy and new thinking. So I'm excited about that. Anytime I get to spend some time with FFA or 4-H kids, it's like, this is a good day. It's a good day. But I'm also mindful there's a lot of urban kids that once they see what ag is about and they put their hands in that soil, they fall in love with it. And then what we're doing in Farm to School to see how our students from the youngest age can respond to healthy eating and nutrition that's not like boring. It's like this about me and how I perform my mind and my body on the sports field. And if we can set those healthy lifestyle habits, we are improving health outcomes for the rest of their lives. And I've heard that the dollar amount is up to $5 trillion a year in chronic disease costs. 50% of that could be avoided with just a healthy lifestyle and healthy eating. That's what we do. Agriculture in California is part of the solution, right?
It is.
And so, I'm very excited of the attention of the incoming federal administration on making America healthy again. Whatever it's called, I'm all in. Count me in on that one. We're there. We grow it. We want to be a part of that. We want to be that. We want to be all things to all people because that's what ag's about.
So your experience in the Nebraska Ag Leadership,
yes,
and I've heard you speak to the California Ag Leadership classes many times, and you just mentioned FFA and 4-H.
Yep.
And as the father of a high school FFA and ag teacher, in our high school was just like yours in Nebraska, is very small, very rural. On a good day, we might have 75 kids in there. But a lot of these kids didn't come from a farm or ranch background, but they have learned to love what agriculture can provide them. What advice can you give these kids? What can you share with them? And I've heard it a lot, but it's what I've heard is very inspirational. Yeah. What is that?
If you're looking for something that's meaningful, that will push you every day with a new set of challenges and help create in you a sense of patience, more successful on some days than others. There's something for everyone. You want to talk about the big table? Agriculture is that. When you look at the full ag value chain, all the way from every input and how that comes to the farm and then is turned into the food and the output and the processing and the marketing of that, there's so many career opportunities that many people don't know about. So I feel that all of us, and the older I get, the more responsible I feel. If we're not in front of young people, at least getting them acquainted with where there are career opportunities, you cannot aspire to something you've never been exposed to. So I feel like we're all champions for what the world of possibilities is in agriculture. And it's not the one thing that might be in the fifth grade storybook today. It's so vast. It's so exciting. And it is so impactful. I mean, think about what we do. When we find solutions that work here for the smallest farm to the largest one here, that's a solution for the world to be able to feed itself. And in a changing climate, extreme weather, all of the events going on, at the end of the day, agriculture has always been here. It's always going to be there. And the future is even more exciting than all the great accomplishments of the past.
That excitement is going to be very evident tomorrow as California Ag Day.
Ag Day.
And
Yay.
Ag Day at the Capitol. It's a great event. Tell us a little bit more about what happens out on the west steps of the state capitol.
Well, first of all, we transform it. Now, there's some new rules about the weight of tractors that can't be up on the steps like they have been in the past, but we'll have farm equipment.
Those are pretty popular.
That's very popular. People love to stand there and just get a sense of the scale. Like, it's pretty fun to see that. And everybody wants to get up on the tractor and have their picture with that. And so we'll have equipment like we always have, and critters. So there's always horses. There's always at least one or two cows and rabbits, of course. Won't be poultry this year because of avian influenza, but goats are also really, really popular, as you know. And then, of course, it's important to have a taste. And so there's a number of food booths. There's usually a couple of mobile labs. But then, like, there are 4-H kids and FFA students. They're in booths, but they're also out walking around. And of course, there's flowers for everybody. This is California. There's flowers for everybody. So that's just a few examples of it. There is always a formal program. The first partner, once again, wants to come out and say hi to everybody. And we'll have some of our lawmakers there. But it's really about people and reminding everyone that works in a state agency or in the Capitol building, this is ag. This is one day we're bringing it to you. Go to a farmer's market. The next time you go wine tasting, stop to look at those hills around it and think about the people that work that land too.
Where can people learn more? Yeah,
so our website's the perfect place to find everything you want to know about Ag Day. Get ready for this one. It's cdfa.ca. californiarangeland.gov/Ag Day. See you there.
Madam Secretary, your time is extremely valuable and you've shared so much with us today. We are so grateful not only for your time today on the podcast, but for all the work that you're doing on behalf of the farmers and ranchers in the state of California and frankly, nationwide. You are such a value to people of California, and we appreciate everything you're doing.
And trust me, I'm the most grateful person you'll ever meet for you, your leadership, the people that you represent. I just can't thank you enough for the vision that you all have and the hard work that you do every day for so many people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Secretary Ross. If you'd like to learn more about California Ag Day on March 19th, visit www.cdfa.ca.gov/Ag Day. It's a fantastic event celebrating the state's agricultural heritage. It's on the west steps of the Capitol. You will have a great time, I know it. And if you're in the area, join us at 4 p.m. for a special screening of our award-winning documentary, You Just Can't See Them from the Road. Secretary Ross and California Natural Resources Agency Secretary Wade Crowfoot will be in attendance to give opening remarks ahead of the film. The event is sponsored by the California Cattle Council. Learn more and register for the screening at rangelandtrust.org/FromTheRoadFilm. That closes the gate on another episode of Tune Into the Land. As we continue this journey through the season, we want to remind you that your feedback does matter. Share with us your thoughts by leaving a comment or a review. Let us know what you enjoyed, what topics you'd like us to dig into, and your suggestions for future guests. Don't forget to hit that follow button so we can notify you when new episodes drop. And if you'd like to support our mission, please visit our website at rangelandtrust.org. There you can make a donation or check out the Get Involved tab to learn more about the upcoming events and the conservation projects we've closed. Thanks for listening, and until next time.